Welcome to Some Guy's Garage. Today we're going to take a look at the DeWalt DCE560 Cordless Caulking Gun. These come in a few different sizes. This is the 10 ounce 300 mil, so it takes the standard caulking tubes that most of you will be used to, but they also make it in the larger tube size. I think those are 29 ounces, and then as well the sausage tubes in a couple different sizes as well. So this size is probably the most useful for homeowners and things like that, where you're not doing construction and probably only use a part of a tube at any one time anyway. But if you're in construction and doing, say, a lot of adhesives and things like that, the larger tube sizes can be more economical. So first, let's talk a little bit about how it works. It's very similar to a normal caulking gun. There's two triggers here. The top one actually releases the plunger so you can move it back and forth, sort of like the release button on the back of a normal caulking gun. And then the second one actually advances the tube. And you heard there at the end of the stroke, it had kind of another noise. That's the auto anti-drip feature. So it'll move forward, and then when you let off the trigger, it'll pull back a little bit. That'll keep the caulking tube from dripping when you're done your bead. And then on the back of the caulking gun, there is a speed control. So we were on speed 1, it goes up to speed 6. And you can see here on speed 6, moves pretty fast. And does a larger reverse at the end of it, whereas on speed 1, moves fairly slow and a little bit less backwards movement as well. But overall, they are fairly simple. I would say the only downside to these versus a regular caulking gun is the size and weight. So obviously it is a fair bit bigger to have the motor and all of that assembly with the battery and the trigger versus just a standard caulking gun. But the advantage with this is you don't have to keep squeezing the trigger, and it is very consistent. So you can move at a steady pace without getting those kind of lumps in the beads that you would normally get. The reason I got this was actually, if you've been watching my basement finishing series, was to do the foam board on the foundation. I had to use about a dozen tubes of PL300 foam glue. So trying to do those with a regular caulking gun would have just been a really big pain. So with this, I was able to dispense the adhesive I needed really quickly and easily. Okay, so let me show you how that works in practice. So we'll pull the slide all the way back. We'll insert the tube forward and slot it in, and then push the slide forward. This is a tube I already had open. I am on speed 1, and there's just a small hole in this. And we'll dispense some here on the paper towel just so you can see kind of the speed at the lowest setting. Just once the plunger gets to where it needs to be. You can see there, comes out at a fairly nice slow pace. And then when I let off, it does stop coming out, and the anti-drip feature, I mean, this is a bit older caulking, so it was a little less fluid, but as you can see, it does stop at the end. And you do always get a little bit oozing out, but not too bad compared to if the anti-drip feature wasn't there. So we'll just run a little bit more here for the fun of it. Like I said, this tube is old, so I'm just kind of trying to get rid of it. But you can see it works fairly well, and again, if I come to a stop, like I said, it was a little less fluid, but does stop dribbling for the most part. So as you can see, it did go fairly slow, but for really delicate or detailed work, you still probably want to use a manual caulking gun. But let's switch this tube out for some construction adhesive and crank it up and see what it can really do. So I've got a tube of PL Premium here. If you guys haven't seen these little caps just are something you can use that kind of roll down over top of the tube of caulking so that you can save it for later use. They're pretty cheap. I'll leave a link in the description. But we'll throw this in the caulking gun here, if I can, get that off my fingers. And we'll slide that in, pull the trigger to get this forward, and we will turn this all the way up to setting 6. And this is where it's really quite impressive. So here we go. This can dispense probably this entire tube in a matter of seconds. So and as you heard, again, the anti-drip feature, but you can see just how quickly that can dispense the adhesive on setting 6. So if we roll that down a little bit, we'll go kind of in the middle here. You can slow it down to a more reasonable rate, or even right down to a crawl. Or like we started off with, all the way up here. And that was the end of the tube. So as you can see, it auto stops when it does reach the end, so you don't have to worry about blowing out the front of the tube. It's worth noting though that it does leave a little bit of caulking in the end of the tube. So if you put this in a manual gun, you are able to get a little bit more out of the tube than you do with this. But for the convenience and the fact that most of the time, at least for myself, I don't usually finish an entire tube, that little bit of extra at the end doesn't really matter, but it's something to be aware of. And just a couple other features to talk about. You can rotate the tube at any point. So if you do have an angle cut in the end, you can turn that tube around to get it to a different angle. And there is a poker on the back to open up the tube of caulking. It doesn't stay put very well. So you'll see one of the main complaints, this rivet can be a bit loose, and so it doesn't sit in that little groove too tightly, and this will kind of flop around at times if you bump it on anything. So a little bit of a downside, but overall, if you're applying a lot of adhesive or caulking, this is such a game changer in terms of how easy and quick you can do that. And just to finish off here, we'll remove the tube. So pull that back while holding the trigger and slide the tube out of it. Anyway, that's the DCE560 cordless caulking gun. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it. It was incredibly useful while I was working on the basement, especially with the adhesives. And I can definitely see myself using it a lot in the future rather than a manual caulking gun. If you have any questions about it, let me know in the comments below. If you aren't already subscribed, please consider it. And as always, thanks for watching.